This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, kicks off the show as he explains a recent case that reminds people of what can make a person an expert, especially in agriculture. Program Manager for the Kansas Agriculture Safety and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson, continues today's show discussing safety reminders for various categories of children. Concluding the show is part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast, where Brad White, Bob Larson, and Scott Fritz chat about the timing for Working Calves. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby. Good to be with you.
Roger, today wanting to talk on one of your recent blog articles titled Expert Witness Reliability in Agricultural Litigation, and what is a recent case that has brought up this topic?
Well, this is an interesting case coming from kind of north central, northwest Kansas that centered on a dispute between a farm couple. It's a married couple that owned a farm and pasture ground, and the plaintiff, which was a service provider or operator regarding pasture rental and custom farming, and allegations about things that were going on the land that impaired the land's productivity and use. And I think the central conflict involved the plaintiff's use of the defendant's pastures. And the defendants were claiming, the landowners were claiming, that the usage was unsanctioned and resulted in impairment that was in a material fashion to the land. And of course, the farmer claimed that the usage was appropriate and was supported by rental rates consistent with local market averages, and it didn't cause the damage that the landowners were alleging.
What expert they used to look at this field of what's happening with this case and pasture ground?
Well, we had actually a K-State extension specialist that testified with respect to custom farming services, the conditions of the land itself, the pasture rental rates, whether the usage was sanctioned and whether it resulted in material impairment, whether standard rates were used, what the land quality was, and the evaluation methods used to come to all of those conclusions.
And is that something we see often in other types of litigation?
Yeah, in ag cases like this where we have a dispute between particularly landowner and tenant, in those situations, and you're arguing over market rates with respect to rental, land use activities, whether they're good farming practices or those types of things, there's a lot of extension data that's used to bolster one side or the other. And that's based on data that K-State collects either through surveys or actual data, actual market data. And that is often used in these cases. That's how we determine what would be the appropriate outcome depending on the particular issue, whether it's pasture rental rates, usage of pasture, whether it's diseases to crops, damages to crops, spray drift, all these types of issues. There's a lot of extension data that is used in those cases to prove a point for one side or the other.
Why was that maybe per se an issue in this case?
Well, the landowners, the defendants in this situation, wanted to exclude the testimony of the expert witness, which was the extension specialist here, who had over 30 years of experience in various roles in extension over the years and was well regarded. They tried to throw out a standard set forth by the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1993. Any attorneys listening know that as the Daubert case. And he tried very hard to make a motion to the court to get the court to toss out all of this evidence by the extension specialist on the basis that it was no good, saying that, well, this is not technical, published, peer-reviewed data in some journal someplace. But the court disagreed with that. The judge said, no, I'm going to let it in. That Daubert standard applies differently in an ag context. And that's what attorneys really need to understand. This is a reminder of the high burden that's required to exclude expert testimony, particularly in the ag context where experience is often the currency of reliability.
Obviously did not happen in this case, but what would be a scenario where maybe expert testimony could be denied or kicked out?
Well, when we're getting to very technical things involving scientific data, I can think of such things involving computer science, those types of things that would be very, very detailed things. If we're talking an ag case, for example, of, what damaged my crops? Well, you can have an extension specialist, an ag agent who's got lots of experience in dealing with crop diseases, those types of things, provide a technical expert opinion on what actually caused the damage. Was it this chemical, that chemical, so forth and so on? That's just one example. You can have land grant data used to support what is an acceptable rental rate. If a rental rate for a pasture or land is at issue in a case, and that can come up in various contexts, even in the tax side of things. That's what extension people are specialists in. That's what they help farmers and ranchers with. And what the court will say in this instance is you have non-scientific reliability. And that can be used in these types of ag cases. If an expert uses established tools, such as the Kansas Department of Agriculture's custom farming rate books or K-State Research and Extension lease summaries, the courts are going to generally view that as a reliable methodology. You don't have to have peer-reviewed journal articles, those types of things. And if it's a bench trial instead of a jury trial, bench trial is tried directly to the judge. So in a bench trial like this case that we're talking about, the court said, look, the usual concerns about unreliable evidence or misleading a jury carry significantly less weight because there's no jury that's involved. And so that relaxes the court's so-called gatekeeping intensity because the judge is deemed to be capable of weighing the evidence accurately and disregarding the unreliable portions. So what I'm saying by all of that is if you motion to exclude the evidence based on it not being technical scientific evidence, the court's not going to grant that motion. The court's going to say, I can make that determination myself. The evidence comes in, and then I'll determine whether it's reliable or not.
We've obviously focused towards more of a Kansas case today, but is this something you see for across the country in agriculture?
Yeah, rural practitioners in general will often rely on experts who are practitioners. Again, extension agents or retired farmers even, or ag economists. Retired farmers are some of the best experts that are out there because they've been in the business for many, many years. It's just comparable to hiring as your expert, let's say Warren Buffett, for example, just to pull a name out of the air, or Elon Musk. They are experts in their particular field. Well, so is a farmer with respect to farming practices. So rural attorneys will often rely on these type of experts rather than academic researchers with white papers. And what this case does, and this is a federal case out of Kansas, it gives us a blueprint for defending these experts and also identifying the limits of a motion to exclude their testimony. So what you've got here is the court reinforcing the principle that weaknesses in an expert's underpinning, so failing to explicitly account for, let's say, drought conditions or using a slightly broader geographic data set, that goes to the weight of the testimony, not its admissibility. It comes in. It's going to be admissible. Now, whether it's weighty enough, that's a different issue, but that's for the court to decide. So if an expert has a logical basis for their opinion, then the appropriate remedy is cross-examination of that and presentation of contrary evidence. The remedy is not to exclude it, and that's what the court is saying here.
What are some key main points then for not only rural attorneys, but also our farmers and ranchers?
Yeah, I'd say primarily for the attorneys, let me start with that, is let's not focus and waste time and clients' funds on trying to exclude evidence. So pivot from exclusion to cross-examination. Don't waste your resources filing motions to exclude based on minor methodology quibbles or nitpicking and experts' experience. Unless that expert is fundamentally unqualified or is relying on junk science, which you're not going to have with extension data, then focus your efforts on developing a record for cross-examination. So what you want to do is you want to attack the reliability of the data in the courtroom, not the admissibility of the expert in a pretrial motion. And then when you're retaining experts, farmers, non-farmers. You want to prioritize those who use state-sanctioned or industry-standard data. And so your gold standard on this is going to be K-State extension bulletins, USDA data, state custom rate books. Those documents insulate that expert against reliability challenges because that information constitutes an accepted practice. And like I said, that's the gold standard of data when it comes to farm information, is your extension data. The impact for farmers and ranchers here is that the information that they gather, and just think about this in terms of technological data that farmers have these days. It's just incredible what the combine records, what the tractor records. They've got that data at arm's length. It's right there, and they can use that data. Plus, they've got a wealth of practical experience. And that practical experience, what the court is saying, that counts for an awful lot here. Here, you didn't have a farmer that was the expert. It was an extension professional that was the expert. But farmers would be in the same position. They have that practical experience. The court is saying, I'm not going to exclude them as an expert because of that wealth of information that they have, even though they didn't publish it somewhere in some highbrow journal and it's not subject to peer review. Well, it's subject to their farmer peers as reviewed in terms of their farming practices. And so the point is that in ag, that Daubert standard set forth by the Supreme Court in 1993, it's applied completely different in the ag sector. And if you've got a reliable expert, that information is going to come in.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link his blog article, Expert Witness Reliability in Agricultural Litigation, in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing youth and children on the farm. And to talk about it, we're joined by Program Manager for the Kansas Agriculture Safety and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson. Tawnie, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shelby. Thanks for having me.
Tawnie, as we're at the beginning of May, it means school time and kids being in school is coming to an end, and wanting to think about a few safety reminders when it comes to those kids being maybe back on the farm full time. But before we talk about those safety reminders, what are some advantages you see for children growing up on a farm?
So growing up on a farm can be a great experience. And I think it really teaches kids a lot of responsibility. It teaches a good work ethic. You know, they're watching their parents work day and night, rain or shine. So, I mean, they understand what it takes. It also offers independence where the kids can learn and go out and do some things on the farm by themselves, mirroring what their parents do, you know, gaining those work skills. A lot of farm kids are really prepared to go into the work field, and because they've been out there, they know what it's like. They know the responsibilities that it takes to take care of livestock and take care of crops. So I think they take the initiative as well to see things that need to be done. And that's just part of growing up on the farm. They're good problem solvers. So I think it's a great opportunity, and we're lucky that we have a lot of farms in Kansas and a lot of kids that have grown up in agriculture here at K-State.
And as we're thinking about those children, maybe before they've even entered school, what are some safety reminders when it comes to babies?
Babies, you don't normally think about being on a farm, but one thing that we need to keep in mind is agriculture is one of the only industries where we live and work the same place. And there are not any other industries where we would have children of all ages and even adults of all ages at the workplace. And so a lot of times babies, toddlers, and little ones are exposed to things on the farm and around the farm that, you know, as we all live there, we just think it's part of it. But we do need to be careful and cognizant of protecting our little ones. And so hearing is a big one. Wearing some type of high quality ear muff, types of ear protection, will help protect their fragile ears and their auditory systems as they are still developing. So even short bursts of a loud noise. And then a lot of times people also will, you know, carry their babies with them when they're doing work, like on a tractor or in a combine. Some of that will come a little bit later in the season, but just making people aware that There's not a lot of research yet on children because it is difficult to research little ones, but we know that in adults, the whole body vibration is considered an occupational hazard. And so we know that it affects the inner ear and balance and equilibrium. It can cause chronic fatigue and headaches in adults. So what does that do to our children? And we don't really know for sure, but I mean, it's probably not a positive effect in the long run if they spend an extended period of time in equipment and around equipment. The other would be like eye protection. If there's flying dust around, if the adults are wearing eye protection or any other type of PPE, then the children certainly should be wearing it as well.
And as those children get a little bit older and maybe a touch more mobile, what are some considerations for those toddlers?
So toddlers are interesting because they're more mobile. And so it's important to create a safe play area on the farm for kids. And they still need to have constant supervision, but having an area that can keep them busy, keep them entertained, and also away from the hazards around the farm. Thinking about where you set that place up. Is there good air quality? Is there going to be some sun? Do they need sunscreen or skin protection from insects or pests or noise and that kind of thing? Also, what do we make their play areas out of? So one of the big pushes that we're having in the agriculture safety and health realm is to not allow children to play in corn or other grain. And a lot of people do that. You see it sometimes at little fairs and that type of thing, is they'll have some corn in a bin and let kids sit in there and play. But really, that is not a good idea. We recommend using something more like dirt or sand. Allowing kids to play in grain kind of sets up an unsafe message that it's okay to play in grain. And it really is never okay. Another point that I have is high visibility vests or t-shirts, hats. I love those for toddlers. And we're seeing them around a lot more. You know, make it fun. Put the farm name on it. Something maybe funny that grandpa says or the kids say. And that's their shirt that they wear when they're on the farm and hanging out, or there's a lot of activity going on. Like, you're going to wear your fun farm shirt today. So I think along with good communication of what's happening, if parents are home and there's a lot of guys out working in the field and they're bringing trucks and equipment in, then we have to have really good communication. The kiddos need to know that if they see a truck come in, that's really cool and they're excited. They don't run to the truck. Instead, they run to a safe place. Maybe it's on the front porch. They can still watch and see what's going on, but they're in a safe place. So we need to teach them that as they understand rules and, you know, whatever their capacity is really, I think, what we need to continue to reinforce with them.
When we go up a little bit more in age, grade school, and maybe what more age-specific safety reminders do you have for them?
Making sure that anything that's harmful is put away or locked up, such as chemicals, paint, gasoline, those types of things. Anything that they could get their hands on that could cause hazard. Maybe it's not if it's just sitting there, but if they would take it and do something with it, maybe it could be problematic. So also making sure like the keys are removed from equipment. They need to be educated about what the dangers are. And again, whatever they can process, whatever age they are and intelligence they are, let them understand why it's dangerous. You can look online. On YouTube has a lot of different farm safety information and videos, which I really like. They're really well done. And maybe that would even be a way to reinforce what the parents are trying to convey to the kids. Also, grain bin accidents and incidents are more prevalent in 11 to 15-year-olds, which is about that grade school age. And I think it's mainly because they're curious. They can get out. They're a little bit more mobile than the younger kids. And so we want to, again, continue to remind them that grain bins and grain carts are not a place to play.
As we do continue to climb in age, as we're thinking about these safety reminders, what do you have for, per se, middle school and high school?
So middle school and high school kids are starting to drive equipment, maybe drive trucks and that type of thing. We do have a youth tractor and machinery training program through K-State Extension. So be sure and call your extension office and find out when those are planned. There have been some already. Some will be coming up this summer. They're for 14 and 15-year-olds. And kids under 14 can also take it, just not get certified. And above 15-year-olds can take it as well and not be certified, but they can still learn all the information. So if you want to send your kids to that, that's a great training program. We also have an ATV and we'll soon have a UTV safety training program through Extension. And so that is offered throughout the year and throughout the state. We just trained some new agents on that. So we're really excited to have some training available for different communities. Also, the older kids, they need to wear appropriate clothing. Boots are important. Pants are important. And why? They need to learn about sunscreen and skin safety. And they are at that age where they can manage that themselves. So they do need to understand. So it's just a matter of having it available, reminding them, making sure that they get out there and do what is safe. Probably just good modeling from the parents is important as well at this age. If parents and grandparents are doing things that are unsafe and say, do as I say, not as I do, I mean, that's not setting up very successful culture and habits of safety. Really showing them the right way to do things. If it's a new task, showing them, having them demonstrate it, make any corrections, give them praise, make it interesting and fun, but at the same time, just making sure that they are learning the proper way to do things.
As we're focused on safety, what if something happens? What should hopefully parents have taught their children to know what to do next, or what's something they should have hopefully conveyed to their children?
So every farm needs to have an emergency plan, and that might be a bigger plan of what if there's a fire, or what if there is bad weather, and so what do we do? Where do we hide? That type of thing. But what if the kids are home alone or are out someplace and an incident happens? Say a fire starts. What are they supposed to do? Figuring out what that plan is. Where are the phone numbers so that they can call? Do they just call 911, call mom, call dad, run to grandma's house, whatever it might be? Have a plan so that also that the parents know what the kids are expected to do and vice versa. The kids understand. And you can practice the plan. I mean, it's always great to spend a little bit of time, put it together, write it down, and make sure everybody understands their part. And also having a good meeting place. So what if there is an incident on that property? Then where are we going to go? Where are we going to meet so everybody knows everybody's safe? And that would just be up to the individual family to decide, but there should be a plan.
If people are wanting to find more resources on this, where can they do that?
Yes, we have a great website full of a lot of different resources. And the website is K-State.edu/KASH. And there is a tab for youth safety and resources. So check it out. And I'm always happy to hear more feedback if anybody wants to give me some ideas of what they'd like to see and hear.
Tawnie, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was Program Manager for the Kansas Agriculture, Safety, and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson. I will link the resource that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast as Brad White, Bob Larson, and Scott Fritz answer a listener question from a veterinarian.
He's got clients that will talk about how soon prior to processing or how early prior to processing should I gather cattle. So should I gather them immediately before we process them? They're not held for very long, or should I gather them for hours or days and have them held in that period? And how does that impact their behavior going through the chute was his question. I'm going to follow up with how does that impact the efficacy of anything that we do as they're going through the chute? Bob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it is a good question, and the listener asked specifically if there's research on this topic, and I'm really not aware of any research that really looks at either behavior or immune response to vaccinations and those kinds of things. But I'm trying to balance low-stress cattle handling, so bring the cattle up quietly. But in general, the things that cross my mind, I'd like to process them fairly soon because a lot of times access to waters, because as I concentrate cattle into a smaller area, they're going to need, as a group, more water more quickly. And so I don't want them dehydrated. And in some ways, from a diet standpoint, can I deliver enough feed? So I want them well-rested, feed and water. And the longer I hold them close to the processing chutes, that makes it more challenging. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it makes it more challenging. I think depending on the size of the herd and the size of the area that you're gathering them from, I know guys that'll gather them up the night before and bring them to the pasture right next to the processing chute. And, just to make that gathering time minimal. And I think there's some logic in that. In general, I don't like to have them sitting too long. And again, it's water and feed and just close proximity to each other. One of the benefits health-wise for range cattle is that they spread out. And so I actually like them to be spread out as much as possible.
Yeah. And processing is not innocuous. We did a study a few years ago, probably 10 years ago now, where we looked at processing cattle. We were monitoring behavior, and all we did was run them through the chute. We didn't give vaccinations. We didn't do anything else. We ran them through the chute, and then their behavior was altered for the next 3 days of what they did and how they allocated their time, how much time they spent walking around. So it changed it a little bit. The more I get them up, do I have more or less impact? And I think part of his question was, and I could see this as being logical, if I do the gathering in one step and the processing in step 2, and they're separated by time, the cattle have time to calm down. So they don't necessarily, they aren't as worked up. They're not going through the chute worked up. Scott, what do you think?
I kind of went at this from a different angle, and part of it's because that's, I don't know what I got to focus on, but it's a lot of times the corral areas are the ones that it's where all the bad stuff grows. So you end up with these toxic plants. That's kind of the angle I'm going on. But you get this overgrowth, all these weeds and things, and then you hold cattle in there. They're going to eat it. And I've just experienced. I've run into a few absolute wrecks where you hold, and it's typically smaller groups, but you hold them in a corral and they eat nothing but that one plant because they can't get anything else for a period of half a day or whatever it is, and then the outcome's pretty poor. So I'm sensitive to that just based on my experience. But back in practice, I don't know that it mattered. I think a lot of it depended on the cattle themselves, like how they were actually handled to gather. Was the gathering easy? Did you have to get kind of fired up to get them where they needed to go? All of that, I think, matters. And different herds respond differently, I think. And, people handle them differently as well.
Exactly what you said. It depends what gathering means, right? Does gathering mean we're moving them from the pasture next door into the corral system, or we're moving them from the pasture that's miles away where we're trailing them or loading them on trailers and bringing them in? That all makes a difference. I hadn't thought of. That's a great perspective because typically what grows in the corrals is whatever wants to. It's not monitored. It's not maintained. And our corrals and our systems are used infrequently, but they're trampled down whenever they're used. So what comes up a lot of times is weeds, and some of them can be toxic.
Once again, that was BCI's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Scott Fritz. You can listen to the full episode by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by finding it by going to ksubci.org. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.